Hi everyone, we're live here from Simon & Schuster at Home, and we're here today to chat with best-selling authors Mary Alice Monroe and Kristy Woodson Harvey. They're going to be talking about their newest novels, On Ocean Boulevard and Feels Like Falling, as well as some of their favorite books that make you feel like you're on vacation. Books are really great right now because even while we can't travel as much this year, you can travel through your book, and their books are so perfect for this type of vacation, or as we like to call it, a bookcation. But before we kick things off, I just want to mention a few housekeeping items. We've got a special bookcation prize pack. So if you ask the questions in the comment section below here on Facebook, you'll be entered for a chance to win some of the ebooks from these authors. And I'll be looking out for your questions throughout the live so that way we can answer them here on camera for you. And on that note, I'm going to hand things off to my colleague, Michelle, to introduce herself and the authors. And then I'm going to hop off camera so I can look at your questions, and I'll come back at the end. So over to you, Michelle.
Okay. Hi, so I'm Michelle. I work in publicity at Gallery Books I'm with Kristy Woodson Harvey, the author of Feels Like Falling, and Mary Alice Monroe, author of On Ocean Boulevard. I don't know where they are on screen, but around here.
We should hold up our books, Kristy. So I go with this one.
And do you know that I don't have one? They're in the bookcase behind me, though.
So before we get down to the book talk, the real meat of the discussion, we're going to play a little fun game of lightning round questions.
We're starting off with lightning round.
We are, yes. I'll start off category or, your favorite blank, and you guys can fill in the answers. So Mary Alice, what's your favorite food?
Sushi.
Kristy?
Chocolate.
That's a good one. All right. Kristy, favorite color?
Pink.
Blue.
Mary Alice?
Blue.
Blue? That's my favorite color too. I'm over it. Favorite holidays? Kristy?
Favorite what?
Holiday?
Oh, favorite holiday?
Holiday.
I mean, does my birthday count? I'm just kidding.
Absolutely.
I think Christmas is my favorite.
Christmas, definitely, hands down.
Yeah, all around. Mary Alice, what's your favorite cocktail?
Martini.
Ooh, Kristy?
This isn't really a cocktail, but just rosé always.
Okay. Mary Alice, what's your favorite season?
Spring.
Kristy?
Summer.
Both good times, both. I love fall, but
Okay, good.
Great.
It's introspective month.
Right.
Poor winter is the loser here.
That's why we love Christmas. We give winter.
That's true. That's true. We love Christmas, and I love to ski. So I mean, I guess I like winter, but summer is summer's just so freeing for some reason.
Summer, it's hard to say summer. I think summer is the most fun, but spring always is like the flutter of hope that's coming.
Mm-hmm.
Favorite TV shows, Kristy?
That should not be hard. Oh my gosh. Downton Abbey. I'm just starting to watch. I'm watching it. It's amazing. I'm like,
you've not seen it?
2013. Like, have you not seen Downton Abbey? I'm just watching it. It's so good.
Okay. Well, I would have to say, since we're going back, I would have to say Downton Abbey.
Okay.
That is a good one. Okay. Favorite Southern phrase?
Hey, y'all.
Bless your heart.
That's a good. Those are the two best.
They really are.
I think so. Kristy, who's your celebrity crush?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, you all will not know who he is. His name, probably you might, but his name is like David Corn Sweat. It's not a good name, but he's on The Politician, and he's so cute. So he's my celebrity crush currently. If you haven't seen The Politician, you should watch it. It's crazy.
Mary Alice?
Oh gosh, maybe Benedict Cumberbatch.
Oh,
maybe
that's a good one.
That's a good one.
Okay, if you could have a drink with one of your characters, who would you choose? This book, past books.
Me or her? I've lost
Oh,
track.
we can start with Kristy. Sorry. Kristy,
Okay.
you go.
I think mine would be Grammy from the Peachtree Bluff series, because I just think she's hilarious and she has lots of good advice and wisdom, but she's just, she's one of those like hilarious Southern grandmothers that you just want to hang out with.
Kara Rutledge. And I wouldn't have said that 20 years ago when I started her, but we've grown up together. And I'd love to just have a glass of wine with her on the porch at the beach house and just talk to her.
It's like an old friend.
Yeah, she's an old friend.
Yeah. So this was probably a hard one, but favorite character you've ever been?
Oh, that's easy for me. It's a tie. I mean, immediately Atticus Finch comes to mind. But as a female, Kaya from Where the Crawdads Sing.
Kristy?
Oh, like ever, or one that we've written?
Ever.
Oh.
I didn't think about one that I wrote.
I'm sorry. I thought you said that for some reason.
Well, the next question is the one you've written, so
okay, good.
Okay, so this is one we haven't written.
Right.
Okay.
Tell that we clearly did not study for this because we are not good. Mine is Francie Nolan from A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. I just love her at all ages, and I just think she's amazing.
So now, which favorite character that you have written?
That's easy for me, Lovey. She's she is the grandmother in the Beach House series, the epitome of a Southern woman.
Lovey's a staple. She's great. Kristy?
I think mine's Diana and Feels Like Falling. She's like very complex and she's had a really difficult life, but she has a really good outlook, but kind of a sarcastic wit. And I just loved her. I have a special place for her.
Okay, so last one of the lightning round questions. Kristy, what did you want to be when you were little? Or what did you want to be when you grew up?
A teacher.
Mary Alice?
A writer. I was in third grade when my teacher told me, asked me if I wanted to be a writer when I grew up, and she named it. I didn't know you could do that. So I've always wanted to do this.
Mary Alice, can you elaborate more on kind of like your path on becoming an author? I mean, from third grade on.
Yeah, well, we've talked about this. I know Kristy's heard this story before. I'm from a large family, and stories were part of putting our children, my brothers and sisters, all the little children to bed. I was one of the big kids. But ever since third grade, I've always written stories and always wanted to be a writer. And yet I studied journalism first. I went to Northwestern, and then I switched over to Japanese. And then so that was all my degrees, graduate degrees are all in Japanese and Asian history. So it's a detour. Wow. And then when I was teaching, speaking of teaching, I was a teacher. I was put to bed with my pregnancy, with my third, and I was feeling sorry for myself. And my husband, who's a psychiatrist, gave me that yellow lined pad of paper and a pencil. And he said, Mary Alice, for as long as I've known you, you've wanted to write a novel, but you never had the time. Now you've got the time. So I actually wrote my first novel like this, because I had a live throne. Yeah. And that was my first novel. It took a while to polish it and to figure out how, now that you have a novel, how do you sell a novel? Mm-hmm. So I joined writers groups, which I think is so helpful for young writers to have a group that will encourage you, not just for the writing, but for the selling. And then that book sold. And so I'm lucky. My first book sold, and ever since then I have been professionally a writer.
Fun to be. Kristy, can you tell us your path of becoming a writer?
Yeah. So when I was really little, I wanted to be a teacher. And then as I got older, I wanted to be a doctor. And I think kind of like what Mary Alice said, I was good at science, and people used to say to me all the time, like, you should be a doctor. And it sort of just gets in your head. And I thought, oh yeah, I should be a doctor. But my senior year of high school, I was the editor of my high school newspaper, and I got an internship at my little local newspaper, the Salisbury Post. And I went in on the first day, and they sent me out to cover a giant squash that looked like Elvis Presley. So it was very exciting, big story. I can't imagine that the real writers on the staff did not want to cover that groundbreaking story. But I started writing the Garden Games series for the paper. And I remember thinking, I didn't have any direction. I didn't know what to do. They just kept saying, go cover these weird things. And I was like, you can't write 700 words about a squash. I mean, it's not going to be exciting to read. So I would go in and interview the people, and I would write about their families, and I would write about their lives, and I got to tell their stories. And that was so exciting for me. And I hadn't really learned that, catchy little phrase yet, that we all have an important story to tell. And so I was just really excited by that. So I ended up having a newspaper column there, and then going to journalism school because I loved it so much, which my dad was like, are you crazy? You were going to be a doctor and now you're going to journalism school. You are never going to get a job. This was like 2003, I guess. And the newspapers were shutting down, magazines were closing. It was a terrible time to like go into journalism. But I did, and I loved it. And I went and got a master's in literature. And then I graduated, and my husband and I got married, and we moved to this little Eastern North Carolina town, and I couldn't get a job. Like in anything that was, So that was in 2008, which again, recession, terrible time, people that had community college jobs, which is what I was planning on doing. I mean, people that have been working for 30 years were getting laid off. It was crazy. So I went to go work in finance, which I really enjoyed, but I started just having all these story ideas. And so I finally thought, okay, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to write one, and I'm just going to see what happens. And I think Mary Alice might agree with this. You don't really know you can write a book until you write a book. I mean, you have this vague, foggy idea of I might like to write a book, but you've never sat down and cranked out 400 pages before. So you're not really sure. There's a big difference between wanting to do it and actually doing it. And so I was not as brave and confident as Mary Alice. So I wrote a couple of manuscripts before I really started to feel like, okay, maybe this is something I can do. And then signed with a literary agent. And then I actually won a writing contest, and that was how I got my first book deal.
Those writing contests really can make a huge difference in your
Well, and you know what? I've wanted to say this so many times on Friends in Fiction. We have a little Facebook Live show on Wednesday nights called Friends in Fiction. But we've talked about the Romance Writers of America a lot. I know you guys have. And it was a Romance Writers of America women's fiction contest that I won. And that was how I ended up getting my first book deal. So.
That is so super. I love to hear that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Huh. You guys have such different paths. It's so great to hear them. So how do you all get to where you are? We're going to kind of switch gears and, talk a little more about your book, but I just want to remind everyone to ask questions, comments, and then you could be entered to win the giveaway of a ebook each of Kristy's book and Mary Alice's On Ocean Boulevard and Feels Like Falling.
Yay!
So let's talk about the books, but no spoilers. I don't know maybe we should go quickly to say a little bit about what your book is about. So Kristy, do you want to go first and kind of give us a quick rundown of what Feels Like Falling is about?
Absolutely. So Feels Like Falling is about Gray and Diana, who are two women from very different worlds who meet when they are both having just a bad day, sort of on the heels of a bad year. And so on a day when Gray could really use a little good karma and Diana could really use some good luck, instead, Gray inadvertently gets Diana fired from her job. So this is not a good way for these two women to meet. It definitely puts them at a disadvantage for ever liking each other right off the bat. But Gray sort of has a lot of guilt about what she has done and what she's caused in Diana's life. And so she hires her to work for her. And so these two women who seem to have absolutely nothing in common realize pretty quickly that they actually do have a lot in common. They're both going through difficult breakups. They've both lost their mothers, albeit in very different ways. And they both have a pretty major situation with a sibling that they're very close to happening in their lives. And those things really bond them. They're also both about to have a really great, fun summer romance. So that's always good. But I really say that these two women, they find each other at the perfect time and they help each other move into Happily Ever After, the sequel.
Before we move on to Mary Alice, Kristy, can you tell us kind of what inspired the idea behind the book, how the book came to be?
Yes. So I am one of those people, I think that I totally fly by the seat of my pants when I'm writing. I never know what's going to happen. I don't have an outline. I don't usually know what the beginning, middle, and end are going to be. And so for Feels Like Falling, I was actually So it's sort of a simple thing. I was going to pick up some photos that I had printed for people for Christmas, like for family members, at my local pharmacy. And I went in, and the woman behind the counter said, "Oh, you have to have a signed photo release from these because a photographer had taken them." And I was like, "I've done this 10 million times. What do you mean?" And she was like, "Oh, well, this is a new rule." And so I'm kind of a rule follower. So I go home, and I had the signed photo release, which was kind of amazing. So I got the release, and I brought it back, and I got my photos, and I was walking out, and I thought, what if I hadn't? What if someone hadn't gotten the release? And what if she had given him the photos anyway? And what if she'd gotten fired because of it? Like, what would happen? And, you know, what would that be like? And I went home that minute, and I started writing Feels Like Falling. And so the first scene that I wrote is when Gray and Diana sort of meet in the drugstore. And then their backgrounds and their stories and their lives formed around that one silly little scene. Yeah.
Mary Alice, can you tell us a little bit about On Ocean Boulevard?
On Ocean Boulevard. The title is it's an important title because I should feel like my arms up. Woo! that's young Linnea. Linnea is it's a story of two women, one 23 and the other 56. They're both Rutledges. It's the old historic family in Charleston, and what we call in Charleston the royalty. And it's the expectations of a young woman growing up under those parameters is very tight and tough. So Linnea is 23, and her mentor is her aunt, Kara. Kara's at 56 is getting married again. And we know that Kara's had a very tumultuous past. She's a very strong woman, very successful in advertising in Chicago before she returned home to reconcile with her mother. And that was the very first, the beach house. And over the course of the last, from 40 to 56, we've watched her mature into this really still strong and steady. Let's say she's more compassionate. She's more understanding. And in this book, she comes fine. It's a woman who's getting married again. Does at the opening of the book, and they're getting the veil, and she's 56 and says, "Yeah, I feel embarrassed. I shouldn't." That whole sense of, do I do this big plantation wedding at 56? And all her friends are, "You're getting married. It doesn't matter how old you are. You're getting married. Have fun." So there's that struggle of a woman trying to decide what's her role at her second wedding in her 50s. And she has a brother who is Linnea's father, who is building a house on Ocean Boulevard, and he had gone bankrupt. And this house is becoming a character in the book because it's the family's fortunes are riding on the success of the sale of this house with so much history. Then Linnea, the 23-year-old, is returning home at the opening of the book from California, back to Charleston. And she knows she wants to go home, as she says, the salt water's in her veins, but she has her tail between her legs. The startup company she went off in a great blaze of independence to California to do failed. Her boyfriend broke up with her. So when she left, she was feeling high on her horse, and now she's limping home. And in her situation, it's having to live with your parents again under their roof as an adult. And in this story, you have a lot of family dynamics and the ups and downs and new people coming in. And of course, the backdrop to this all is the loggerhead sea turtles, which they're all living on the beach. Kara and Linnea are members of the turtle team. So it's on the backdrop. What keeps the summer going month by month by month is the progression of the loggerhead sea turtle nesting saga. So I love the parallel. I always look for that in my novels between what's happening in nature versus how does that compare to what's happening in the human heart. And I love this book, I think, because this is a standalone novel. I always say this. You can never have read any of the Beach House books and read this one, and it's a beginning, a middle, and an end. That's my job as an author. But I will say, as part of the series, it's number 6, if you have read the other Beach House books. And what I love is when someone says, I read Ocean Boulevard and I went back and got the others. Oh, I'm on number 3 and I'm going to go back to it. Doesn't, each book stands alone because the book takes place over a period of 16, 17 years. And in this one, and that's why I think I want to have that glass of wine with Kara is because
Oh yeah.
we've grown up together. And I cried when I saw it towards the end where I am the matriarch of this family now. You know, it's a passage to say I can now look after the young ones, where before I was the young one struggling. Now it's my turn to mentor. And that was a really emotional chapter for me to write. So I love this book. I really do.
Throughout all the Beach House novels, Carol really evolved. And, you know, she's kind of a staple in the series. She's always there. But what made you want to tell Linnea's story this time around? Like, how did you pick her?
That's a great question. It's the next generation. You know, we've watched this generation get older. And Linnea was 8 years old in the Beach House. Here she is 23. And in the book I'm writing now, her brother Cooper comes home he's over at Oxford. He's coming home at 22. So you have all her friends, Pandora and Annabelle and Gordon, all these people that you know, even people from the Low Country series are in this book. The young people, the next generation's coming up. So I'm intrigued with what their choices will be. I can ask my kids what's going on in their lives. But as a mother,
I can't wait to see what's next.
Well, it's the next generation. It really is. I have some standalones coming, but I know the book. That's probably your next question. What are you working on next?
We're almost there, so you can save that one for a little bit. I did want to ask, because, you know, you mentioned the series, you know, the Beach House series and some of the other books. Well, we know the Beach House did become a movie, a Hallmark Hall of Fame movie. But is there another book, if you were able to see one book as another book as it become a movie, which would you pick?
I think the easiest one, hands down, would be A Low Country Christmas. It is, it's under discussion. I don't believe it, you know, in this crazy business, until you see it clear, you never know what's going to happen. But it's a beautiful story set in McClellanville, which is one of the last remaining shrimping villages along the southeastern coast intact. And it's about a Marine who comes home for Christmas, but he has PTSD. And Christmas is our favorite holiday, right, Kristy? When everyone is supposed to be so happy. It's our job as mothers. And what do you do when your son has PTSD? And my inspiration for it was It's a Wonderful Life, which was not a happy beginning, if you remember. He was jumping off a bridge.
Yeah.
But it was the angel that saved him. And in this story, it's a service dog is the symbol of that angel who comes in. It's a beautiful story, and I'd love to see that made into a film. It's not
some Christmas movies out.
It's It's a Wonderful Life. It's a hard-hitting Christmas book.
Kristy, which book or would you like to see into a movie, or even a TV show? Anything, like we can. I guess Beach House, I would like to see it.
Can you wave a wand and make it happen, Michelle?
Yeah, come on, Michelle.
I could.
I think Feels Like Falling would be a good movie. It's an uplifting story. I think it's a good story for right now. More than anything I've ever written, I really like to write family drama. And there is certainly family drama in this book, but more than anything else, more than anything I've ever written, this is a story about friendship. And I think it would be kind of fun to capture on screen. There's also, I usually have a lot of back and forth in time periods in my stories, which can make it a little bit trickier, but this one is pretty much all set, in the present. So I think it makes it, if you're just thinking about it from a practical standpoint, I think it would be pretty easy, to turn it into a movie. And
I could definitely see it. A fun summer movie. Do you have any actors or actresses do you think that, in mind when you were writing the books?
Oh gosh, that is such a good question. Honestly, no, I'm so bad at that. And I need to watch more TV, said no one ever. But every time people ask me that, I'm like, I need to watch more TV. I don't know, young Hollywood and, all these amazing people in it. I felt a little bit more about Peachtree Bluff just because I had, it was more books.
3 books.
Yeah. And so many people have said to me like, oh, this person should play this or this person should play that. I remember someone telling me one time that they thought Diane Lane should play Ansley in Peachtree Bluff. And I was like, oh, that's so good. Like that's
fun
exactly
when
how
that
it
happens.
describes
So
her.
it's like, oh,
Yeah. So that's kind of fun when you know, start sort of putting those things together. But I don't know about For Feels Like Falling. That's such a good question. Do you know, Mary Alice?
Well, the only one I use sometimes actors or actresses to help me, inspire me with the choice of how, so I don't get confused as I write. I like different movements. And if you watch an actor like Benedict Cumberbatch, for example, how he moves, but it did happen. I mean, the funny story, and I think Kristy, you know this one. When I wrote The Beach House, I had Angie McDowell as Kara. She was tall, dark, strong, Southern, and I just thought she was so beautiful. And all those years later, it must have been 15 years later when I actually met her. And it's a funny story, and I won't tell it now just because you don't have all that time. But she and I met, and she bought The Beach House and read the book. And I still have on my telephone recording her voice. Mary Alice, I'm calling you again. I think she called 3 or 5 times. It's Andy McDowell, and I'd love to talk to you. And she made the film, The Beach House. And it can happen. I mean, that was kismet. When the woman that inspired the character calls you up and says, I want to make the film. That just doesn't happen. So I was very, very lucky.
Okay, so we're going to get into some questions. I'm hearing we're getting lots and lots of questions. So again, chime in. But before we get into that, I wanted to ask, what are you guys working on next? What can you share with us? Kristy?
Well, my new book, Under the Southern Sky, is coming out April 20th, 2021. So I'm so excited. I can't wait. This is actually a story that I've been thinking about for 5 years, which doesn't happen to me that often. I'm usually sort of have an idea and write it and move on to the next thing. But it wasn't quite right in my mind until recently. But it's a story about a woman who's an investigative journalist, and she accidentally discovers that a childhood friend of hers had frozen embryos with his deceased wife, and that they have been deemed abandoned, meaning there are a lot of ethical, situations that come into play with this because, they're embryos, so they're, deemed human life. So it's not like they can just destroy them at this moment, but their fate can be sort of up in the air about what happens to them and, where they can go. And so she knows she has a responsibility to tell him about this. But when she does, he, of course, has to decide now what to do with these embryos that are basically the only thing he has left of, this woman that he loves. And so the story is told from the perspective of Parker, who is the father of these embryos, and Greer, who is his late wife. We get to see bits and pieces of her through journal entries. And then Amelia, who is the investigative reporter, and Elizabeth, who is her good Southern meddling mama, because we all need one of those. But each of the characters in this story has a secret, and it has nothing to do with the embryos, but ultimately determines what ends up happening to them at the end of the book.
Mary Alice, what's coming up next for you?
Yes, I'll finish because I sort of slid
it in there.
I wasn't intending to. Usually I write another The Beach House series in a couple of years, and I write a standalone in between. But I'm fascinated with what's happening in families right now. I think this is a unique time in our lives, this pandemic. And I'm not interested in writing about illness, but I'm interested in writing about people and families in close proximities, how they support one another, how little things can blow up to big things, and how sometimes people can take a moment to pause and recognize the beauty of what's happening at the same time. Mm-hmm. So I'm pursuing it. It starts in March, and it's not a summer, but the only thing, I know how it's going to end, because I'm like, Kristy, I am a structuralist. I know beginning, middle, and end. And yet, this one is a little scary for me, Kristy, too, because it's happened. I'm writing lifetime.
You don't know how it's going to end. You can't know.
I'm going to have to do edits, so I hope Hannah's ready. I don't know if a hurricane's going to come next month. So I know the story. It's really more about the lives. but
no.
I know, please, oh Lord, help, no hurricane. You all know
For the North Carolinians and South
That was the whole book.
Carolinians over here.
I had to write the last summer. I'm the summer guests because of hurricane fears. But in this book, I think it's really important to see this family that I'm really fortunate that so many people read The Beach House. It's not I know it's special. And because of that, I feel responsible, not only to the series, but to the readers to continue the story when I think it's time. And this family, I think, has endeared themselves to so many people. I think it might be an example to show how a family endures with commitment and love and perseverance through the hard times. So I believe the title is Waiting for the Tide, which I love.
Ooh,
and
I like
talked
that
about
too.
it. Yeah, and the reason I like it is the phrase, and I think JFK came up with it, that the tide floats all boats. And I think right now we're all waiting for the tide to float our boats again. And it's that time when you see it coming. And that's what I think we're living through. And that's my job as an author, is to investigate families and put my ear to the ground. And we'll see. I'm enjoying the process, but it's also difficult to not know completely what's going to happen at the end.
Oh, well, we're so excited for both of your books.
Thank you.
I mean, I'm so excited to see how they're going to turn out.
I do have to say, and I know we have to get questions, but Mary Alice knows because I whined about this a lot. I probably whined to you about it a little bit too, Michelle, but we were completely done with Under the Southern Sky. Like I had already, done edits and I think maybe even copy edits. And I went back and I was like, oh my gosh, like none of us noticed that this book started in April of 2020. And I was like, well, I can't write a book that started in April of 2020 but I wrote it last year. And I just thought April of 2020 would be like every other April had ever been. And then I was like, uh-oh.
Everything's out.
Or are you going to then change it to like April of 2017 or something?
Yes, that's exactly what I did, because the way the timeline is, it has to work over like 18 months. So I changed it to April of 2017. So yes, you're
random year. I can't believe I got it right.
It spans like 30 years.
Well, that house on Ocean Boulevard might not be there in September of 2020. So we'll have to see what happens.
Okay, so now let's turn it over for some questions.
Yeah, we've got a ton of questions. So thank you all to all of you audience participants who sent us in your questions. The first question is from Hannah, and she asked, while you guys have been staying at home, what have you been reading?
Good one.
Well, we have guests on our Friends in Fiction, and we've been reading their books because we have to talk to them and ask questions. So we've been very fortunate to have some of the most amazing authors on our show, and we will continue to have. For those of you who don't know, Friends in Fiction is our, as Kristy said, our weekly live Facebook episode, I guess you'd call it. And it's now going into podcast, or it is podcast, and we have a website. So it's grown exponentially in popularity. Yeah. And we're so grateful for it. I think we were planning on doing it for like a month. And then people were like, oh, well, no, you can't quit. And then we were like, we're going into the fall. We're going to go every other week. No! So we're like, well, nobody better have anything to do on Wednesday at 7 for the rest of their life, because but it's been a blast. Like tonight at 7 o'clock, we have Jasmine Guillory, and we just had an amazing roster of guests, and we'll continue. So we've been reading a lot of different books from all the different authors, and of course each other's books. But other than that, I'm writing a book. So I read a lot of nonfiction, and we were talking about this on our program, a lot of poetry.
Okay.
I just finished Kristen Harmel's The Book of Lost Names, which we've been so excited about because it's coming out next Tuesday.
I just finished
it. So
too.
good.
Yeah.
Y'all, it's so good. And so I had to get my hair cut. I mean, it had been so many months. And so I'm in there and I'm like masked up, and the ladies masked up, and everybody's like got their hand. I mean, it was crazy. But I'm sitting there and I'm like crying in the chair. And she was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "It's just so good. It's so good." She was like, "Oh, I thought it was like hurting you."
No, we're so happy. She's our gallery sister. And it's so exciting. Not only is the book coming out next week or Tuesday, but we all just love it to death. It's so great when it's such a good book.
Yes.
Yes,
Makes it easy.
commenting in the comments on this live here, Kristen Hermel. Hello, Kristen.
Hi, Kristen.
Hi, Kristen.
We'll see you at 7.
So the next question asks, Mindy asks, did you keep journals when you were younger?
I did like sort of sporadically. I mean, I was never like I always wanted to, and like fictional characters I would read would like have their journal and I would think, I'm going to keep a journal. And then I would make it through, like a few days, but I wish I had done more, honestly, because it's so fascinating to go back and like read yourself in the 7th grade and be like, whoa, that is amazing and horrifying.
Well, I have to say in 7th grade, you did say it, 7th. I think it was 8th actually, and that was the summer I was grounded. And I talked about this the other day, but I made up.
You were grounded the whole summer?
Oh yeah. Welcome to my family.
Well, now I'm wondering
all I did was I didn't get straight A's. I think I got a B on my report card. But anyway, the kids were in our neighborhood because my girlfriend lived across the street. They were going out, climbing out of the windows at night and going to meet. It was harmless. Of course, I didn't, but one night my girlfriend said, I'll pull a string on your finger and wake you up and you can come out. Well, I never woke up. So I wrote in a diary, I made up what I thought would happen. And my parents read the diary. And I guess I was such a good writer. I got in so much trouble. They called all the friends' parents.
Oh no.
Blackballed when I went back to school in the fall. I'll never keep another diary.
Oh my gosh.
I wish I wasn't as good a writer as when I was eighth grade, because they absolutely didn't believe when I said I made it up.
Well, do you
then you were really
believe you now? Like, if that was a story that just came from your imagination?
Oh, I probably met a boy and kissed him or something like that. It was all things I hoped would happen, but never did.
That's such a great story.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so Sharon asks, since you both write Southern fiction or beach reads, besides a beach in the state where you live, what is your favorite beach to visit?
Oh.
So no
do you want to do that one first? No Carolina beaches.
Oh, that's tough. Those are my favorite beaches.
Mine too.
I have to say, I love the Bahamas.
Mm-hmm.
When I was young, we went to the Bahamas all the time, and the beaches are white, and the water's that crystal blue. I don't think there's water anywhere in the world like in the Bahamas.
Mm-hmm. I think the BVI's for me, and we're going in December. I'm so excited because everything was so destroyed. Now I can't remember what hurricane it was, but like 4 or 5 years ago. So we haven't been in 4 or 5 years because everything's like, some of our favorite places still aren't open again. But I'm writing about it right now, and I'm like, oh, this is so great. So every morning I'm there in my mind, and I'm just hoping against hope that we get to go in December. I mean, but who knows?
Oh, and I have to say, for the first time, my daughter has a place in California, and I, for the first time, went to Manhattan Beach.
Oh.
And what a fun place that is. I thought, maybe I'll visit more often, because the young and the old are all like the same age, mentally, physically. They're all healthy. Everyone has little tiny places, but they walk out to get food. That's cool. California Beach is a whole nother experience.
Yeah, for sure. And they're beautiful.
So this one I think is relevant for a lot of parents these days. Anissa asks, what books did you like to read to your children when they were younger? And what books could parents read now to children while they're at home?
Well, I have an 8-year-old. Right now we're reading Matilda because it's Like I loved that book so much. I love everything that is Roald Dahl. But Matilda was one of my favorites. And I thought we've listened to it on audio, but we've never read it. So it's kind of fun because some nights I read to him and some nights he reads to me, but we're reading that. I just got a really great book called Her Right Foot that is about the Statue of Liberty and why, I didn't even know this, that her foot is raised because she's like always moving forward. It's really interesting. I read it to a class like virtually, and an independent bookstore owner recommended it to me. And it was such a powerful book about, the United States and what it means and our responsibility. And it's a really great book. But oh my gosh, I could do this all day. I know Mary Alice, you probably could too.
Yeah, I remember when I was a mother, Chris Van Allberg.
You're still a mother, Mary Alice.
That's what I was about to say.
I remember this was a cool story. I was living in DC, and there was a young, there's a small independent bookstore, and there was a young new author, and he had a brand new book out, and I just sort of peeked in, and I love Christmas, as we said. And it was called, Chris Van Allsburg's The Train, the Polar Express.
The Polar Express.
The Polar Express.
And I went in there, and here he is sitting there with a group of 5 kids reading his new book called The Polar Express.
Oh, wow.
It was so moving. And I bought like 10 copies, or first editions, signed, and gave one to all my brothers and sisters. And I think I'm the only one who has one left. So I have a first edition, Chris Van Allsburg. And it was just one of those moments in time where you sat down and you found this miracle. And speaking of miracles, now I have been doing a phone call reading with my granddaughter, Delancey, and we don't get to see each other. And I was so thrilled that we found the one and only Ivan. It's about the gorilla.
So good.
I highly recommend this book to any parent because it's so beautifully written by Applegate that the insights are good for humans of all ages, not just for little children. But she's been reading it to me, and I'm reading it to her on FaceTime.
Sweet.
And it's so simple. The language is like a poem. I highly recommend it. And I don't know Applegate, but I'd love to meet her, Catherine Applegate.
Okay. I think we only have time for just 2 more questions. I'm trying to pick the best ones. This is an interesting one. Regina asks, did either of you ever have a question from a reader about your current book that led to an idea for your next book?
Question from a reader. I mean, I'm probably speaking for both of us on this one, but I think I was not, and I'm not saying that I am, I have no idea, but the Peachtree Bluff series, 3 books, I thought it was finished. But I get so many notes from people every day saying, please write more Peachtree Bluff, please write more Peachtree Bluff. And so then I think, maybe I should. And then people send me ideas for what the Peachtree Bluff book should be about. And it's really funny. And I'll be like, actually a pretty good idea. Maybe I will use that. But now I sort of have an idea for one. So I'm like on the fence about, Mary Alice and I have talked about this because, I know you took a few years off of the beach house and then came back to it.
Yeah. You never know. Never say never.
Is that why though? I mean, did you do it because you had,
obviously
I have a story for Peachtree Bluff that happened after the book came out that I was like, I really want to tell that story. And I feel like it's a Peachtree Bluff book, but I also think knowing that people want to read it helps maybe.
Oh, for sure. And I think it's always the juggling of other books that are screaming to be told as well.
Of course.
And it's just time. I'd love to write, forever, but it's time. For me, it's not so much someone telling me a story as much I don't have a story idea, but it's about the species that inspires the book. Mm-hmm. So I remember being at a board meeting at the aquarium, and was a special meeting, almost emergency, about the status of resident dolphins. And Philippe Cousteau, who was there talking about how the dire circumstances of resident dolphins, and he was saying, we were talking afterwards, he said, Mary Alice, please, it's time for you to write a book about dolphins. And I went, not just because it was Philippe Cousteau, but because I knew I had a story idea. So if someone will say something like that to me, or like the fellow who's my neighbor, the vice president of the Shrimpers Association, Mary Alice, when you're going to write a book about them shrimpers? They're going to be gone pretty soon because it's a dying industry. And it's like, when you hear it, don't you, Kristy? You know,
for sure,
when it's time.
Well, I mean, for Under the Southern Sky, I had a friend, and this was why I've been thinking about it for 5 years. We were at a cocktail party, and she came to me, and she was so upset, and I was like, what is going on? And she was pregnant with twins, and she said, for 5 years, all I've been able to think about is, I want these babies, I want these babies, I want these babies. And she's like, now I have all these embryos left over, and it never occurred to me what I'm going to do with them. It never occurred to me. And she's like, and they're like, you have to start thinking about what you're going to do with them. You need to make a will. You need to, and she was like, I don't know what to do. Like, I never would have done that. Like, I wouldn't have done all of this and not had a plan. And she was like panicking about it. And I was like, oh my, and she said, you have to write a story about this because there are going to be a million other people that are in the same boat that never thought about the ramifications of what they were doing. And I was like,
I know,
oh
that's a,
well, and every now and then, I mean, a lot of times you're like, yeah, blah, blah, blah. But then every now and then someone says something and you're like, whoa, that is a story I want to write. Yeah. It's a great feeling.
I feel like that might be an interesting sci-fi story.
Oh, it totally could be. Oh,
a different twist.
Ways.
Right.
Yeah, and that was part of the problem is that I had so many different ways that the story could go that I had to but then there, one finally I was like, okay, that's it. That's what I want to tell. But yeah, it's just, there's so many stories you could tell, about that type of thing.
And it's always how you tell them.
Of course.
Right.
And I think it's like something is a great idea, but it has to ring true to who you are and your experiences and there's so much going on in our heads and hearts. So it's not that it's not a good idea if you don't want to write your story as much as it has to click with us.
Oh, of course. And I think sometimes there's stories that people, pitch to us that it's such a personal story that you think, well, that's a story that you have to tell. I could never tell that story because it's not my story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so last question. Looking through the list here, we have so many. Karen asks, who are your favorite authors and who has most influenced your writing?
Well, Kristy Woodson Harvey, of course.
I was going to say, obviously, Mary Alice. I mean, that's okay. We're done. Goodbye. No, I'm just kidding.
But influence is a good one.
Yeah. You take it first, Mary Alice. I have to think about that.
I would say Pat Conroy would be my greatest influence. He is not so much the stories about the Citadel and his family, the great Santini, but his stories about the Low Country, the way he expressed his love and his lyrical writing for the beaches and the animals, to Prince of Tides, the beach music, clearly. And I miss him. I truly miss him. I think the whole Low Country misses all the tribe of authors in the Southeast. We lost a very special, not just a great writer, but a great inspiration as a person.
This is going to be sort of like an odd answer, and it doesn't directly answer it because I can't really even tell you authors' names, but I did my master's in multicultural and transnational literature. And so I spent 2 years reading about other cultures, that weren't my own. And of course, you do that in school, you've done it growing up, but there was something about being really immersed in a particular area that makes you realize how special that particular area is. And I know this is going to sound crazy because I grew up in the South and I grew up reading Southern literature. I grew up, reading all of these amazing Southern authors. But I think for me, it was just normal because that's where I lived. So the stories they were telling didn't seem Southern to me. They just seemed normal to me. And so it was somehow getting to that point where I was it shone a light on how special where I lived was and how I grew up was. And that there were stories to tell that hadn't maybe necessarily been told yet. I don't know if that makes sense. But, and I really just think, honestly, as a child, just reading all the time, all the time, not even necessarily a particular author, but so that when I sat down to write, I felt like I knew how to write a story because I had read so many of them. And just sort of the flow and how the cadence should be and how the beginning and middle and end should work. And now it's time for a surprise.
Right. Well, thank you both so much for joining us today. This is really fun. And as a reminder to all of our audience who's watching, we are having a special BookCation prize giveaway. So you can enter for a chance to win the ebook editions of both Mary Alice Monroe's book and Kristy Woodson Harvey's book. That's On Ocean Boulevard and Feels Like Falling. So you can enter for your chance to win by asking a question in the comment section of Facebook. And don't forget, Mary Alice and Kristy both do a weekly Facebook Live chat called Friends of Fiction. And that's at 7 p.m. on Wednesdays. So you can catch them for more author interviews and Q&As and some just great chats about books with some special guests as well. So thank you all for joining us today and have a good one.
Well, I have to say this has been wonderful to see you all.
So fun. It's so fun. Thank y'all for having us. This was awesome. And we'll see you again soon.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.